As the darkness covers, whispers from the past echo in the quiet space, reminding us of horrifying memories that we thought were buried. Scary stories, where truth and mystery collide, will keep you from sleeping. Below are 10 horror stories, each with its own mark, a dark secret, and a wake-up call about things we can't imagine. Prepare yourself mentally, because what you are about to hear will make you rethink the seemingly simple things around you. 10. Bloody Memories, a Terrible Christmas Eve. When I was just 10 years old, I moved to live with my dad in a completely new area where I didn't know anyone other than his family. In this area, we only had a little connection with the single mother of 3 children. Luckily, there was a girl a few years older than me, about 12 at the time, and we got to know each other for a while, although our relationship wasn't exactly close. However, we have a friend in common. One night, my friend Rob went out with that girl and her younger brother. They were home alone because my friend's mother was at work. That girl's mother was a kind person who often helped the single woman with her work and knew her family quite well. One day, she discovered that the single woman's younger sister was in a mental hospital and had just been released. On the night that Rob went out with the girl and her younger brother, there was a shock on the door. Rob thought it was just my friend's mother because she usually knocks that way when entering the house. He opened the door without suspicion, not knowing that the person knocking on the door was not my friend's mother. As soon as he realized the mistake, Rob panicked and rushed through the window, rushing home along a route he had never thought of before. In fact, the person knocking on the door was not my friend's mother, but the sister of the woman whose mother was helping. She knew clearly about the girl's mother's family and work schedule through conversations with her sister. She came to carry out her plan, and I don't know the details of what happened after that. I feel lucky that I am not my friend's younger brother, who had to go to the neighbor's house to call the police when he realized the dangerous situation. A week after Christmas, Delaney, the sister of the woman whose mother was helping, committed an act of unimaginable brutality. She brutally murdered Rob. She decapitated Rob and left his naked body in the bathtub. She even hit his head, making the scene extremely scary and haunting. No one could imagine that horrifying scene. I don't know exactly where they found the body, but eventually they did. I was not allowed to attend Rob's funeral, and the images of my friend's brutal death will forever haunt me. 9. The Ghost of Fear, the Story of a Bloody Winter Night. About 15 years ago, when we were still dating, my wife's grandmother lived a life full of painful memories. Her husband passed away less than a year ago, and that pain still haunts her. One cold winter night, she decided to participate in volunteer activities at the local library. As late night approached, she felt tired and decided to return early. Her house was only a mile from the library, but the way back was a terrifying ordeal. The road was quiet, winding through sparse trees in the deep reaches of South Texas. When she was halfway there, she felt the presence of a ghost. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, but then the presence became clearer. She turned around and saw a man sneaking behind her, his figure blurred in the weak light of the streetlight. His steps were heavy and steady, like a nightmare following her. Although she tried to go faster, fatigue and age did not allow her to escape. Her eyes were still glued to that figure, feeling his every step getting closer and closer. When she was only 150 yards from home, a cold feeling ran down her spine. He was right behind her, his breath hot and heavy on her neck. She glanced at the light from up the street and hoped she could make him think someone was home. But when she was only 100 meters away, a cold and strong hand suddenly placed on her shoulder. His voice was filled with malice, whispering with an undertone of death, "Don't turn around and give me your wallet, or I'll slit your throat." The intimidation was such that she felt cold sweat running down her back. The feeling of death being right next to her made her panic. In a shock of despair, she turned around and saw his expressionless face. He raised his hands, his eyes filled with cruelty. She had no time to think. Only fear overwhelmed her. She pulled out a .38 gun from her pocket and shot. The bullet went straight into his neck. He collapsed, but death did not come immediately. My wife's grandmother had to witness his torture for the next 5 years as he lay in hospitals and prisons, tormented by painful complications. Until he died, she lived with this obsession. The nightmares never ended. The feeling of regret for not shooting him sooner, the fear of death, all haunted her until her last day. When she passed away last year, the terrifying memories continued to haunt her, like a nightmare that would never go away. 8. The dark secret of the spooky SUV. When I was young, around 8 to 11 years old, my younger sister, 7 years old at the time, often had to stay home to babysit while my parents went out. That was the time when my sister smoked a lot, and my parents didn't want her to do that in the house, so they asked her to go out. I often follow my sister out to play, and that often makes my sister uncomfortable. One evening, as I was standing next to my sister at the end of the road, I saw a white SUV with a bike rack on the roof parked at the end of the road. That SUV had windows so dark you couldn't see inside. It just parked there, silently, watching my sister from afar. When my sister got inside the house, the SUV started moving, stopped in the parking lot near the church, and waited. The presence of the SUV made me increasingly afraid. Even though my sister tried to ignore this creepiness, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Another day, when my parents went out again, the SUV appeared again, and it was parked at the end of the road again, waiting. I felt like there was a pair of invisible eyes always watching my sister from a hidden corner that no one could see. My sister, unable to bear it anymore, decided to face the SUV. She told me to stay in the parking lot and face that mysterious car myself. She got out and walked towards the SUV, but when she was almost there, she felt like a dark force was covering her, a deep fear that made her limbs freeze. She turned around and entered the house with indescribable fear. That evening, while the family was at home, the SUV appeared again. My sister told me to go inside and tell my dad. Immediately, my father grabbed the gun and walked out toward the SUV. But when he approached, the SUV suddenly drove away at a terrifying speed, running straight down the nearby highway, leaving behind a cloud of dust. My father, with fearful eyes, wrote down every detail of the car, but the license plate had been taped with black tape, making it unreadable. Even though many months had passed, we never saw that SUV again. But the haunting gaze from inside the car and the feeling of being watched never left us. On dark nights, the image of the mysterious SUV still appears in our dreams, making us feel that mysterious and dark presence is always lurking, ready to return at any time. 7. Intruder in the night. When I was just 4 or 5 years old, my parents separated. My mother lives in a small 2-bedroom apartment where I have my own room, but I often choose to sleep in her bed when I'm with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway facing each other, and the apartment was on the first floor. It was a hot summer. My mother opened the window to let in the cool breeze. One night, in the quiet of a summer night, I woke up in total darkness. I sat up and saw our cat sitting by the door frame of my mother's room. This was very strange because the cat usually lies next to us in bed. It entered my room, making small noises, and when I turned around, I saw a scary figure standing next to the open door of my mother's room. My breathing became heavy as I realized it wasn't a dream. A man was standing there, silently and stealthily, trying to leave the bedroom. I don't understand how that person could move so fast. I shook my mother awake, and when she opened her eyes, we looked back at the door frame, where the stranger's silhouette was still clearly visible. My mother didn't hesitate. She picked me up and literally rushed me out of the room. We ran toward the window, screaming for help, and luckily a neighbor heard us and called 911. The police arrived quickly, but despite searching the apartment, they found no trace of the intruder. Our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the criminal had escaped through there. However, my mother confirmed that night she locked the door with a deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, when my mother was cleaning the kitchen, she opened the water heater cabinet and discovered a notebook with strange names and drawings, along with a pair of gloves and chewing gum wrappers. The police were once again called, but it can only be speculated that the man was in our house and waiting until we fell asleep. The feeling of dread and insecurity still haunts us, a horrifying reminder of the danger lurking in the very place where we once felt safest. 6. Laughter in the dark. While I was doing laundry in the basement, a light bulb suddenly went out, leaving the rest of the basement in pitch darkness. The basement is divided into 2 areas by a wall. The laundry room was separate, and to get upstairs, I had to leave the laundry room and walk through the rest of the basement. The only remaining light was from a light bulb that emitted pale blue light, illuminating the empty and gloomy spaces. When I finished washing, an indescribable fear suddenly came over me. I had to walk through that dark road, with each step feeling like I was stepping on thick air. Then suddenly, when I was halfway there, a creepy, haunting laugh rang out right behind me. It was the sound of an old witch, her laughter low and hoarse, as if caught in the darkness and curse of decades. That laughter evoked a feeling of an invisible presence, making the air around me feel thick. Uncontrollable fear made me rush up the stairs, as if being dragged by an invisible force. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on escaping that ghostly shadow. When my father returned, I asked him to change the light bulb, but from then on, that creepy sound never appeared again. I never dared tell anyone in my family about it, and fear still gnaws at me every time I face the darkness in the basement. 5. The stranger under the bed, the tutor's night of terror. Minji, a girl in her mid-20s working as an English tutor in Korea, experienced a haunting night a few years ago. One evening, after a late tutoring session, she had no idea that she was about to face a nightmare. The high school student Minji was teaching, who was confused because the bus had stopped running and his house was a long way away, asked permission to stay the night at her one-room apartment. Although feeling uneasy, Minji finally agreed. When she returned to the apartment, Minji prepared a sleeping place for the student on the floor, and she herself leaned back on the single bed. After the two fell into an exhausted sleep, the peace of the night was suddenly broken by a strange noise. At around 2 a.m., the student woke Minji up with a request to have a late-night snack. Minji, feeling it was not the right time to go out, tried to convince the boy to go back to bed, but the student insisted on going out to eat, even though Minji suggested that he could cook some himself ramen. Finally, after many minutes of persuasion, Minji agreed to go out with the boy to find a restaurant. But as soon as they left the apartment, the student turned to Minji and admitted that he wasn't really hungry. That statement made Minji feel like something wasn't right. The student explained that during the night he saw a terrible scene under Minji's bed. A homeless man was sleeping. This fugitive lived silently in Minji's apartment for 2 months, hiding under the bed without anyone knowing. When the police arrived at the scene, they confirmed the macabre truth of Kevin had been occupying Minji's apartment for a long time. Minji, faced with this dark and terrifying truth, cannot imagine how much her safety is being violated. The nightmare has caused her to never feel safe in her own home again, and the image of the man hiding under her bed will forever haunt her mind. 4. Horror in the desert, the horror mystery of the rising body. As I drove through the quiet roads from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I came to terms with the desolation of the high desert east of Los Angeles. The shortcut I chose was just 2 lanes running through vast spaces, nothing but emptiness, except for a lonely name, Amboy. Amboy, a nearly abandoned town below sea level, level with Death Valley, was where I drove alone in the late afternoon, continuing my journey up the mountains between Amboy and I-40. Once I conquered the summit, I began to descend into a canyon with tall grass lining both sides of the remote road. Suddenly, a strange scene appeared before my eyes. A red Pontiac Fiero parked across the street, open suitcases with clothes scattered everywhere, and 2 bodies lying face down in the street, a man and a woman. I stopped about 100 feet away, the hair on the back of my neck standing up like a Marine facing a deadly threat. My heart was pounding as I reached under the chair and pulled out my 9mm pistol, ready to face whatever was lurking around. The scene before me was so perfect that it made me feel like I was falling into an elaborate trap, like a brutal ambush was waiting. But when I looked around, I spotted a line that could help me get across. I adjusted the steering wheel to avoid the Fiero, headed left, around the woman lying behind it, and continued on the road on the other side. This road is still long, and I slowed down, trying to catch my breath and calm my beating heart. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the sight terrified me. The 2 bodies on the road had stood up, kneeling on the road, and about 20 people were pouring out of the tall grass on both sides of the road, walking towards the car and the body. Fear ran like electricity down my spine, and my right foot slammed on the gas pedal, not stopping until I pulled out onto the I-40 East ramp. I will never know what might have happened if I had stopped, if I had dared to get out of the car to check on the bodies or stop closer. The desolation and mystery of this land have not only tested my courage, but also left horrifying hauntings that I will never forget. 3. Nightmare on the James River. That evening, on the banks of the James River, the fresh air and light from the flickering fire created a peaceful scene. My group of friends and I sat around the fire, sipping beers and chatting leisurely, enjoying a relaxing night of fishing. But that peace was suddenly torn apart by an unusual change. We suddenly felt a heavy silence cover the air. The laughter and chatter suddenly stopped, as if an invisible switch had been turned on and off. The group turned to face the other side of the river, where the faint light from our fire reflected off the rippling water. It felt like there was a cold, invisible gaze piercing through us, an indescribable feeling, as if something was watching us from the other side of the river. Then, from the darkness of the other side, a blood-curdling scream rang out, menacingly cutting through the silence. That sound was unlike any sound I had ever heard. It was a scream of despair, as if a wild creature was enduring an unbearable torture. That scream tore through the air, making every hair on my body stand up. It not only causes deep fear, but also evokes an unquenchable feeling of horror. We stood still, no one moved, as if hypnotized by that haunting sound. Our eyes never left the opposite bank, where the light from the weak fire reflected off the rocks and dark trees. A heavy silence reigned, and amid the tension, a second scream rang out, this time with even more force, as if the sound was being amplified by their own fear. Some of us started to panic. They rushed toward the trucks, taking out guns and other defense tools. When we returned, the heavy silence still prevailed, and the light from the fire still reflected on the riverbank, but we could all only sit quietly, attentively watching every move. We felt like there was something waiting in the darkness. Something more terrible was silently observing us. When a third scream suddenly rang out, this time from our riverbank, it was no longer a distant scream, but from nearby bushes, just a short distance from us. This scream was truly terrible, like a scream of death, a cry for salvation from extreme torture. The sound made the air stifling, and we felt like our hearts stopped beating in extreme fear. With no time to think or discuss, we all rushed towards the trucks, leaving almost everything behind, feeling like something was about to rush in from the darkness. As we got into the car and started to flee, the screams rang out again, just beyond the tree line, a final reminder that something terrible was waiting in the darkness. We didn't dare turn back, didn't dare stop until we were completely out of that area. The dark night still surrounds us, and the haunting scream still echoes in our heads, never knowing what made that creepy sound. A terrible mystery that we will never forget. 2. Intruder in the dark night. It was a dark Friday night. As we rushed to the hockey game, the hustle and bustle and laughter in the car seemed to obscure a terrible fear that was silently invading my mind. When I arrived, horror struck me when I realized that my phone was gone. I had left it at home, but this was just the beginning of the nightmare that awaited. When I borrowed your friend's phone and hurriedly ran to the bathroom, each ring of the phone rang like the knock of signs of death. Finally, there was the sound of a machine, but the other end of the line was just dead space. I shouted through the phone, but was only met with eerie silence. My mind started drawing up the worst scenarios, thinking that my brother might just be playing a cruel joke. Returning home, the darkness and silence seemed to press fear into my chest. My parents and younger brother were not there. I called them, and the answer was that they had gone out to dinner and a concert in the park, leaving shortly after I left home. But one haunting question wouldn't let me go. Who answered my phone when they weren't home? My fear kept rising as I realized this terrifying contradiction. At that moment, I heard my back door open and close with a terrible noise. My heart was pounding like thunder as I rushed out the front door, ran to the neighbors, and called the police. When they arrived, they reported that the back door was open and traces showed that an intruder had snuck in. Even though nothing was stolen, the fear and horror of thinking there might be an intruder lurking in my dark house kept me from sleeping. 1. Stalkers in the dark. Recently, a new family moved next door to me, and in that family there was a son whom I cannot forget. Not only does he have terrible diseases, but he is also haunted by horrifying images that no normal person can endure. This boy, only 19 years old, has shown strange and scary behavior. He has a habit of hurting stray animals and weak creatures that no one can protect. He even had an obsession with the horror stories I experienced while serving in Vietnam. Those stories, which were already difficult for me to tell, now became his bad pleasure. This makes me feel insecure, and I worry about my family's safety, especially my daughter's. My daughter, who was only 7 years old at the time, was his main target. He often stood behind the fence and tried to talk to the girl while she was playing in the yard. Not only that, he also tried to reach her by phone, often calling her house just to chat with her, even though she didn't want to. One time, when I discovered that he had called my house to talk to my daughter, I couldn't control my anger. I threw something at him and told him to stay away from her. But that was just the beginning of the horrors. After that incident, the situation became more serious. My daughter started having strange and scary symptoms. She is constantly scared and has bizarre fantasies about monsters lurking under her bed and in her closet. The girl said that there were evil creatures always stalking her, and she was so scared that she didn't dare get out of bed at night to report to us. We checked her closet and under her bed, but found nothing unusual. However, the feeling of anxiety continued to increase. One night, while my wife and daughter were at Grandma's house for a relaxing night, I was home alone and decided to watch some movies via HBO. I was so tired that I fell asleep on the sofa downstairs around 2 a.m. Suddenly, I was awakened by an emergency call from my neighbor. They reported that their son was missing and asked for my help in the search. When I woke up, a feeling of nervousness rose within me. I quickly walked out of the house and walked past the neighbor's son's room to go to the bathroom. At that time, I saw his door open, and there was no sign that he was still there. The situation became more serious when I realized that my daughter's room was also lit. Feelings of fear and anxiety filled my mind. I immediately called the police and reported that there was an intruder in the house. In the meantime, I ran out to my truck to grab my shotgun, ready to face any danger. When the police arrived, they began checking every corner of the house. When they opened the door to my daughter's room, the scene inside made me unable to believe my eyes. The police discovered the neighbor's boy standing in my daughter's closet, watching her sleep under the moonlight. He admitted that he simply enjoyed watching her sleep. The light from the lamp shines on his face, highlighting his madness and extreme obsession. A feeling of horror and obsession invaded my entire body. My world suddenly collapsed, and the peace I once knew became a horrifying nightmare. Everything I once felt safe and peaceful suddenly became scarier and scarier than ever. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey to discover these scary stories. Hopefully you have felt the thrill, the obsession, and the valuable lessons from these experiences. Remember, in every story, there is a piece of truth and things that we should never forget. Don't let fear be just an emotion, let it be a part of memory, a reminder of what may lurk in the darkness.